If you struggle with feeling hopeless, sad, or otherwise mentally fragile, you're not alone. More than 100 million Americans, that's literally 1 in 3, struggle through life with a depression. Pharmaceutical companies are quick to pick up on this broken brain problem, but the conventional medicine we use cannot cure it. In this episode, we will talk about key reasons for anxiety and depression and how we can take steps to manage and even eliminate those disorders from our lives. Our experts will discuss the role of our hormones, our food, our sleep, our relationships, our stress levels, the health of our guts, and we'll also discuss the importance of one key tool that works as well or even better than antidepressants.
The anxiety was so bad that I couldn't get out of bed. I would have panic attacks. I would sweat profusely, and I was scared for my life.
At my worst point through this ordeal, I was actually pretty much bedridden. I had to have help getting across the room to my bathroom. I had to have help pulling up covers. I had to have help getting dressed. I couldn't drive. I was pretty much in a mess. It was a dark place, and it was a very rough time in my life.
When depression hits, it hits hard, and our entire world can feel like it has been turned upside down. Look around. Chances are you might know someone who's dealing with depression or anxiety. Maybe it's even you. It's time to reclaim control of our mental health by understanding what steps we can take to manage and even eliminate these disorders from our lives. Before we learn what those changes are, let's understand just how big a problem depression and anxiety diagnoses truly are, and how conventional medicine is not giving us the complete picture.
Depression is the top cause of disability worldwide. It is going to be, or already is, the top cause of disability in America. When you look at the most common mental health disorders in America, it's been like 40 million Americans have a diagnosable anxiety disorder. And then just look at things like there's now 60,000 overdoses in the opioid crisis. There were 40,000 suicides last year. These numbers are growing. So when I look at those numbers, I feel like there is a wave that is crashing on our country, and it's a wave of mental health disorders, and which are rooted in brain health.
With its symptom-based medicine approach, conventional medicine tackles depression completely wrong. Rather than determine what actually creates that depression, many doctors immediately reach for their prescription pad. That explains why 1 in 6 Americans take some kind of psychiatric drug, mostly antidepressants. This is not normal.
With conventional psychiatry, it's largely driven by the pharmaceutical industry and managed care. So physicians are under time constraints to only spend a certain amount of time with patients. The reimbursements are for very short visits, and it's difficult to be able to spend the time you need to really get at the heart of the issue. And I think that's true not just in psychiatry, but in every discipline. So I think that some of the challenges with conventional psychiatry is that it's really based on symptom management. And there's not a lot of research that isn't funded by pharmacologic companies, and so it's really medication-based. And physicians are expected to prescribe medication, and then the insurance companies want therapy to be done by therapists because it's less expensive. And so you have this division of, you have prescribers, and then you have people who are coming in and trying to use therapy to get at the underlying issues, and there's just a disconnect. My first job out of my fellowship training was with a big HMO company. If I said the name, you'd recognize them. And I used to get in trouble for spending too much time with my patients. And I would have patients who would come in and they were alcoholic or having a major depressive episode, and they'd never seen a physician to discuss it before. And I was expected to do their entire evaluation and treatment in 20 minutes. And it just didn't make sense to me that someone who is suffering from an alcohol use disorder, my supervisor literally told me that I need to give them Prozac and Trazodone for sleep, and then you're done, and send them out. And it just wasn't a good fit for me at all. When I kind of fell into the practice and the group that I'm with now, I think the biggest draw was just the ability to take time with people, to really get to know what's going on with them, so we could look beyond treading water and just trying to manage the symptoms of the moment, but get really at the heart of everything.
Patient come to the office, and then the conventional psychiatrist immediately want to put the patient in a box. And then the box is man-made categories of DSM-5, ever-growing number. And their mind is constantly working on that, which category I can put this person. And during this time, they forget to really hear what the patient needs to say and where is she coming from. On the top of this, since managed care, limited time also does not allow for any deep and thorough assessment and even time for listening to the patient.
Let's say you complain to your doctor about chronic feelings of sadness and despair. He or she might say you have a disease called depression, but depression is not the cause of your sadness and despair. It's just a name we give to a group of people for the purpose of giving them all the same drug therapy. Feel sad and full of despair? You have depression and you need an antidepressant. Case closed, but it isn't. Medications can be life-saving and are incredibly useful if given in the right dose for the right person at the right time for the right reason. But the problem in medical practice today is that our only tools are medications. The old adage, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, applies to medicine today. The best or right treatment for any particular condition may be ignored because all we have studied and used are medications. Conventional medicine fails to address what causes those feelings and why they differ from one person to the next. Let me give you an example to drive home my point. You and another person both have a headache. Your pain is created by drinking too much wine every night, while his results from being hit on the head with an empty bottle every night. It's the same label, but entirely different causes. Obviously, these two chronic headaches can't be cured in the same way because their root causes are different. Yet that approach is exactly what the current medical community takes to treat depression. Simply label the disease and approach the treatment identically, even though the cause of that disease may be radically different from person to person.
Depression's an interesting subject because there's such a huge spectrum. Is it years of frustration that have now collapsed in on themselves to become depression? Is it food intolerance that's led to years of drain of the vitalistic energy that keeps the body going so that you just don't have enough juice to be happy and be there? Is it situational? Is it circumstantial? There's a lot of reasons someone would be depressed. And so again, when you're looking at a holistic framework, you look at the body in its entirety and you say, okay, well listen, your systems are down, you're not sleeping well. Let's adjust your digestive capacity to bring out more energy from the food that you're taking, and let's get you moving, let's get the energy in your body flowing, let's get some sunshine. And all of these things become kind of part of a prescription for someone, say, who has depression, right? So it's not, the depression isn't a deficiency in an SSRI, right? It becomes a worldview that has been shifted based on some sort of internal locus of control that's been lost or compromised. And so it's not always easy, but looking at the whole person, looking at the situation, and then coming up with solutions that are dealing not just with the biochemistry and the neurochemistry, but the socioeconomic status. Maybe you're depressed because you're broke all the time, right? And so there's a lot of reasons that these negative items stack. And as we know, people who have depression end up stacking more and more depressive items until eventually there's this feeling where you can't get out from under it.
Our goal in medicine should be to find the right medicine for each person without prejudice Whether it is a drug, a nutrient, a diet change, detoxification, a hormone, exercise, or exorcism, we must embrace whatever works, and we must inquire into its effectiveness with all our scientific, economic, and political resources. But do antidepressants such as Prozac, and stimulants such as Ritalin, and tranquilizers such as Valium actually work? Are they safe? What problems are associated with them? And is there a better alternative to medications like these that address the underlying causes of mental illness and brain dysfunction? These mood-altering drugs are the fastest growing segment of the pharmaceutical market, and as a group constitute the second biggest class of medication in total sales and prescriptions. In children alone, over the 3-year period from 1997 to 2000, the use of antipsychotic medication increased by 138%, atypical antidepressants by 42%, and SSRIs or antidepressants by 18%. The global use of ADHD medication rose 300% from 1993 to 2000. What's worse is that the use of untested and potentially unsafe combinations of psychotropic drug cocktails has increased 500% in children. Today, modern psychopharmacologists dispense drugs like candy despite their limited effectiveness. Often these drugs are administered in untested cocktails and in combinations which may occasionally be helpful, but come with more side effects.
I've seen so many people having terrible, terrible side effects from medication, and they can't get off the medication, but staying on it is not helping them either. So I've always looked for ways to work differently so that they would be able to work and play and be healthier without all the effects of the medication, the unwanted effects. Unfortunately, conventional psychiatry is built on treating symptoms, and that's just not how it works. You know, we have to go to the root cause. I love functional medicine because we are always looking for the root cause. And we have the ability as a human being, as part of nature, we have the ability to heal ourselves when we're given the right materials. So I think in a way the use of medication is kind of a lazy way. You know, just treating symptoms is lazy. It's not going to look for what's really going on. Is it a B12 deficiency? Is it an MTHFR defect? Is it a genetic defect? Is it a hormonal issue? These are the things we really, really need to look at as physicians. And I'm so glad that I actually went to medical school and that I am a physician and that I can write prescriptions if I have to. So people trust me because they know, you know, I'm not just saying that because I can't write prescriptions, but I really choose much of the time not to. Many side effects to the medications. One of the ones that's particularly bothersome is people may lose, for example, they may lose the depths of their depression, but at the same time they also lose their joy. So they may not be hideously depressed, or with anti-anxiety medications, they may not be really, really anxious, but they also, instead of having the, you know, the ups and downs of life, of feelings, of emotion, of experience, this kind of a flat chemical brain. You know, they're not thinking right, they're not feeling fully. And it really affects relationships. There's also sexual side effects. Another really bad effect is weight gain. I mean, I've seen particularly with young women, because it affects them so badly psychologically. You know, you get a girl 16, 18, or a young adult put on an antidepressant and some of the psychotropic meds, she'll gain 10, 20, 30 pounds in no time. And it's horrifying. Men too. But I'm just saying it's particularly devastating to the girls. And it's just not a good thing. It's interesting to note that one of the big side effects of medication is something called akathisia. I'll try to spell that one. So akathisia is a kind of it's defined as, quote, motor restlessness. It's a kind of a feeling like you're crawling out of your skin, and you have to do something about it. And people become very irritable, and they do some really bad things. There's also, this is very interesting, they start to imagine, because it is their imagination, but they start to think that they're getting messages to do harm to someone or to themselves. And it's almost like it's outside themselves, but it feels like it's them. And it's hard to explain unless you talk to someone who's experienced it. And it's so distressing. I remember speaking to one woman who said she couldn't believe it. She'd been on an SSRI, an antidepressant, and was having these weird thoughts of hurting someone. It was actually someone in her family. And she said, that's not me. This is crazy. So she stopped the medication. She's someone who had some awareness. She had worked in the health field and had some idea and had the courage to stop the medication. And immediately, that very distressing and very dangerous symptom went away. When people have these bad reactions to medications, all kinds of things are really going on, and there's a lot we don't understand about the brain. What we do know is that some people genetically are more prone than others to have these side effects from medication. Some people are more prone to become very agitated. So if you can do some genetic testing in advance, you actually can tell who's going to be better suited to a particular medication. When somebody first comes to me, and I get a lot of people coming to me specifically because they're dissatisfied with their medication. It's not working, they're having side effects, they just want off it. But they know, and some of them have tried, they know that when they go off too quickly, they have very bad side effects, really bad effects. With some of them, people become suicidal. And it's so scary that they go back on the medication. The doctors are actually complicit about that, because when a patient says, I want to go off the medication, they'll usually say, no, you really should be on it for life because you have blah, 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 whatever. You have depression, you have bipolar disorder, you need to be on it for life, and you should not go off it. But then, okay, you want to go off, do that. And the doctor knows that they're going to have terrible withdrawal. So the way to do it is very different. And I'll tell you how I approach it. First of all, I approach it like I'd approach any other patient. What's going on in them? What is the origin of the issue that made them be on medication? They could be depressed and they're on an antidepressant, but if they have an actual thyroid issue or an adrenal issue, let's address that. So I address that. I look at their diet. I look at their nutritional status. I look to see if they're, say, B12 deficient or have a genetic disorder having to do with how they methylate, so which is an important aspect. It's a chemical reaction in making your neurotransmitters or your brain chemicals. So I'm looking at a lot of different things, and as I treat them, this is before we even start going off meds, I'm building up their body, I'm building up their own resources. Then we very gradually start to withdraw the medication slowly, really slowly, and reinforcing or supporting the system, the neurotransmitter system, with targeted, very specific nutritional supplements. If somebody wants to get off their medication, the first thing you do is talk to your doctor, because they're in charge of the prescription, and just see what their attitude is. It's also very useful to either find a doctor, and it doesn't have to be a psychiatrist, but some sort of a doctor, MD or ND, who can help support you in the process to support your biochemistry. For example, if you're getting off a stimulant, you want to be also on some specific amino acids like tyrosine, phenylalanine, B vitamins, and so on. So you want to either see somebody like that or have your doctor work in conjunction with a more holistically oriented practitioner, or have him or her, the psychiatrist or the prescribing doctor, take care of the medication, the prescription, and at the same time see someone else who really understands the process. It's better if they're actually talking to each other, but that's not always possible. That doesn't always happen.
Consider the rather astonishing example of antipsychotics or major tranquilizers, including Risperidol, Zyprexa, Seroquel, and Geodon. This class of medications is one of the biggest growing sectors in drug sales. Antipsychotic usage has shown a 10 to 20% rate of increase year over year for the last few years, and today's sales of these drugs total about $12 billion a year. Traditionally, such medications were reserved for psychosis, defined as an inability to distinguish what's real from what's imagined. Hearing voices and thinking that aliens are visiting your bedroom at night are examples of psychosis. But now, with little hesitation or little scientific evidence, antipsychotics are given to children with behavioral problems and autism and ADHD, and to adults with depression and anxiety and OCD, to patients with bipolar disease and Parkinson's and dementia. These drugs can lead to serious side effects. Besides acting like a chemical straitjacket and making people dull and slow and stupid, they increase the risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, stroke, blood clots, and more serious conditions known as neuroleptic malignant syndrome, where your body literally burns up with fever and your muscles are destroyed, as well as something called tardive dyskinesia, which involves uncontrolled, repetitive, involuntary, and purposeless movements such as lip smacking, rapid eye blinking, grimacing, and spasms in the legs. What most consumers don't understand is that drug testing is often very limited before drug approval. New drugs are tested on a few hundred to a few thousand people, often for very limited time. This usually means a few weeks or a few months. Ultimately, drugs like antidepressants don't cure the disease. They just mask the symptoms. We don't need to continue using these same drug treatments that don't work, that make things worse with side effects, and at best give partial relief. There's got to be a more effective way, and there is.
If you think the most dangerous illness for you and your family, it is not cancer and heart disease. The most dangerous illness for you and your family is depression, by far. It's more prevalent, it's easier to get, and unfortunately, it's more lethal. And so the good news in that is that the science is really clear that the biggest factor under your control to influence your risk of depression is in what you eat.
Our high sugar, high starch, low fat diet, along with all the processing in our diet, is extremely harmful. In fact, we now know that omega-6 fats, refined omega-6 fats from processed oils, not naturally found in nuts and seeds and food, but processed oils, have been linked to depression, to homicide, suicide, violence, and even poverty in very well done studies by the NIH. So I think we underestimate the impact of food on our mood.
When I started eating right, the clouds lifted, and I thought, wow. And I was diagnosed with celiac. It's like, wow, okay, this wasn't my fault, and it's getting better and better and better. The journey is not over, and it's never going to be over, but I just feel like it keeps getting better and better and better. I'm not depressed anymore. I'm often happy, which just eluded me for years. At the darkest, I would just have these deep black storms of feeling depressed and angry and frustrated, and that just doesn't happen anymore because I know what to do. I just feel as though learning to eat a diet that actually supports my brain and my metabolism has been the greatest gift that I have gotten. Literally for 60 years, I struggled with feeling depressed. It's not fun to be that person who can't get up and go because it's just not, the enthusiasm just isn't there, Nobody ever associated my depression with diet, with food before. They just didn't make that connection.
What happens clinically, what we see is people just, first of all, they get depressed, right? Your brain is made of fat. It needs certain fat-soluble nutrients. Certain fats, like the long-chain omega-3 fats, highly correlated with depression. We actually have a reasonable data signal you can use them to treat depression. Most recent meta-analysis by the Cochrane Group found that there was a statistically significant improvement if you pool all the studies.
I think there's a long list of foods that are going to be good for the brain. If you want to kind of put it into more simple categories, good quality fat, just like, there's poor quality fat. Good quality fat I'd put up at the top of the list. Our brains are mostly fat. So, to get the nourishment for your brain and for development, it's really, really critical. And there's certain fats that are essential. There's a lot more information now out about it, but your omega-3 fats, your omega-6 fats, they're essential because we don't make them, so we have to eat them.
Do you suffer from depression? If so, I want you to ask yourself these questions. Do you have a deficiency of omega-3 fats? It's likely, considering 99% of Americans have an omega-3 fat deficiency. In addition to eating these healthy fats, which come from grass-fed meats and grass-fed butter, from coconut oil, from avocados, from nuts and seeds, you also want to avoid the refined vegetable oils, which have been shown to be linked to depression, to violence, homicide, suicide, poverty. And these are refined vegetable oils that we never consumed in human history. We've gone a 1,000-fold increase in our intake of refined soybean oil. That's 100,000% more of these refined oils than we had 100 years ago. And they're not really designed to be consumed in those massive quantities. As long as they're in your foods, eat the soybeans, eat the nuts, eat the seeds, but avoid the refined vegetable oils because they're bad for your brain.
When I was struggling with Hashimoto's, it was really, really scary for me because I had anxiety attacks and panic attacks that I'd never had before. I started to have new onset anxiety disorders, and I started to have social anxiety. One of the worst things that happened with Hashimoto's is that I started to have brain fog. The brain fog that comes along with thyroid disease is quite scary because you don't know what's happening to you. So you can go from being this really intelligent person that's on top of your game, can tell jokes very quickly and can study things and remember things very quickly, to all of a sudden walking into rooms and forgetting why you got there in the first place. That can be very, very scary when you feel like your mind is slipping away from you, where you're slowly losing parts of yourself. I became less funny. I became less outgoing. I became less interactive with the world around me. And this was all related to Hashimoto's. People with thyroid disorders can exhibit a lot of symptoms that affect their brain. Some of the things that I've seen are going to be fatigue, brain fog, apathy, irritability, anxiety, panic attacks. We're also going to see times of depression. I've seen people who are misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I've even seen people who were hospitalized for psychotic disorders as a result of Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's encephalopathy is also a commonly undiagnosed condition where thyroid antibodies can actually cross-react with brain antibodies, or perhaps there's a mechanism where thyroid antibodies cross through to the brain. And what can happen at that point is a person can actually have a lot of challenges. We might see them having struggles with their gait, with their balance. They may have seizures. They may have symptoms like dementia, delusions, and even hallucinations. So there's a big spectrum of how Hashimoto's can affect the brain. There are so many different root causes of mental health issues and brain deterioration and brain fog. And the thyroid is actually one of these causes that is fairly resolvable. And so whenever you have these symptoms, you may have heard that there's nothing you can do about your brain function, that you're just getting older, that this is what happens when you're a mom. But actually the thyroid condition can be a root cause of a lot of your brain symptoms and a reversible reason for them too. Unfortunately, there have been many times where people were misdiagnosed and they told they had X condition, whether that was a mental health condition or sometimes a type of dementia. And the conventional medical approach was that this condition wasn't really reversible and that this person either had to wait as they deteriorated or take lifelong psychiatric medications. And what we've been able to find is that when you actually address somebody's thyroid condition, in many cases, these symptoms can be reversible. And in many cases, there are things that are commonly misdiagnosed, such as bipolar disorder, even seizure disorders, panic attacks, anxiety attacks. All of these things can stem from thyroid disease and are fairly easily reversed when you get the proper thyroid treatment and when you address the autoimmune component of your thyroid condition.
When we see a lot of chronic patients have hypothyroidism, their chief complaints are depression and fatigue, and most of that is brain-based in some of these patients. Because as their brain gets inflamed, they can't activate their brain, so they have depression. Their fatigue is really brain-based because they have no need to do anything, and everything they do activates their brain. So their exhaustion and depression is really all brain, has nothing to do with the thyroid. So when they spend all this time trying to figure out the right thyroid medication dosage, they're usually unsuccessful because they haven't really addressed their brain autoimmunity or their autoimmunity in general.
What I really like to recommend for people with Hashimoto's and for thyroid disease is to focus on eating a whole foods-based diet that's minimally processed. The diets that I've seen the most benefit with are going to be the paleo diet as well as the autoimmune paleo diet. So we've actually been able to see and measure improvement in people's symptoms as well as in their thyroid antibody markers, which can tell us how aggressive the thyroid condition is. And we see symptoms like headaches, panic attacks, palpitations, weight gain, fatigue. All of these symptoms begin to melt away when we get rid of the reactive foods and we focus on having organic, wild-caught, real foods within our diet. I love to see people eating bone broth. I love to see them eating good fats. I love to see them eating organic and wild-caught meats, right?
We published a study 4 years ago. We looked at 400 healthy blood donors in the U.S., and we measure their antibodies to wheat protein and milk protein. And we found that there was actually close to 15% of the population that had antibodies to different proteins associated with casein and gluten, right? And of those, we found half of them had brain antibodies. So the Hashimoto's hypothyroid person is very genetically susceptible to gluten and wheat. So when you add in their antibodies for the thyroid attached to the brain, and being thyroid hormone deficient turns on brain inflammation, and many of them have gluten intolerances, and that turns on brain degeneration, brain inflammation, we see that.
As far as nutrients go, some of the most important nutrients that we want to address are going to be selenium. Selenium deficiency has been recognized as an environmental trigger for thyroid disease. We find that 200 to 400 micrograms of selenium methionine can reduce the attack on the thyroid gland by about half. We also see that it reduces anxiety. We also see that it reduces hair loss and a whole host of other thyroid symptoms. I also really love to see people with thyroid disorders, and especially when they have any types of fatigue or brain fog, on thiamine. Thiamine, around 600 milligrams, has been clinically shown to reverse thyroid fatigue in as little as 3 to 5 days. I love the benfotiamine version as well. This has been very, very effective for many of my clients and readers. A key component of addressing thyroid disease is to address the stress response. If you're dealing with a thyroid disorder, I really, really encourage you to be your own health advocate, to learn as much as you can about your thyroid condition so you can take action on getting yourself better. Some things that you can do in your very own home include going on a gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free diet. We see transformations sometimes in as little as 3 days where people's symptoms will melt away once they do that. Make sure that you're eating blood sugar balanced. So get plenty of good fats and proteins in your diet. Reduce your carbohydrate intake. You're going to start feeling a lot better. The fatigue is going to melt away, the anxiety is going to melt away, and your brain's going to be functioning much better as well. I also encourage you to take on some stress-relieving hobbies. So whatever you can do to put your body into more of that rest and digest state is going to really, really help you in the long term.
Ask your doctor to check for the following blood tests: TSH, free T3, free T4, and thyroid antibodies. Do you have vitamin D deficiency? This is especially likely if you're depressed during the winter, so have your doctor check for 25-hydroxy vitamin D. Your level should be at least 50. Vitamin D is a critical brain nutrient and has been linked to improvement in cognitive function and delay in many chronic brain disorders. Do you have folic acid or B12 deficiency? Ask your doctor to test your homocysteine and your methylmalonic acid levels to check for these deficiencies. And take an extra 800 micrograms of methylated folate and 1,000 micrograms of B12. Do you have food allergies or sensitivities? Food allergies create a metabolic disorder that can lead to a whole host of mental symptoms, including depression. Gluten and dairy are the major culprits. In fact, partially digested dairy and wheat particles are found in the urine of severely depressed patients, as well as children with autism and ADHD and schizophrenics. These proteins change the brain function and can lead to not only depression, but also psychosis and autism. Do you have inflammation? The standard American diet, or the SAD diet, contains a host of pro-inflammatory foods. To treat depression, you need to get rid of the causes of inflammation and restore the normal immune balance through our food and nutrients, as well as our exercise, sleep, and stress management habits.
Man, the sun came out because I stopped eating gluten, and I'd never heard of gluten before. I didn't know anything about it. But after a few weeks of eating paleo, the depression went away. and the arthritis pain went away. And I started sleeping better. And then I had this couple of crazy experiences of being offered pizza, and I was hungry. It was lunchtime. I thought, oh, well, no big deal. And have a slice of pizza. And 2 hours later, I'm in my car weeping, feeling as though the whole world has crashed just in a black hole. And I thought, wow, okay, this gluten thing may have something to it. So I thought, okay, that's it. I'll go back to the no gluten for a while and see how that goes. And I felt much better. My mood lifted, my clarity of thought improved, the depression went away. And then it happened again. I was with somebody, we were going out shopping, and let's have a quick snack before we go, and she put out toast and cheese. And I thought, well, don't be rude, it can't be that big a deal, no big detour here, let's just have a little snack and then go. And 2 hours later, this time, rather than just a black mood, it was a rage. It's like I blew up, and I realized that gluten is like poison for my mind.
What are the symptoms of gluten sensitivity, and what kind of brain disorders actually are resulting from gluten sensitivity?
Oh my goodness, it runs the gamut. There are a number of papers of reversing schizophrenia. In the medical literature, reversing schizophrenia with a wheat-free diet, these are not celiacs, these are gluten-sensitive people. Reversing schizophrenia, a year later, they're still checked out of the treatment centers, and they're not on any meds. Mm-hmm. And they publish a year later, these people are fine now as long as they're wheat-free. Yeah. So it can be schizophrenia. Most common is depression or anxiety. Those are they're called the affective disorders with wheat sensitivity. That's the most common. Anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, migraines, seizures, any function of the body. If the tissue is being compromised by inflammation, and if wheat is the gasoline on the fire, when you calm down the fire, any symptom may improve.
One of the emerging concepts in medicine today is this idea of inflammation, that most chronic disease is caused by inflammation. Diabetes, obesity, cancer, heart disease, and even dementia.
Yeah.
Even depression and autism and ADD, all we find are linked to inflammation.
Yes.
So you've been involved with the development of certain tests that actually help us look at the immune system response that affects the brain. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
You bet. As far as I know, all degenerative diseases, as far as I know, are diseases of inflammation. At the cellular level, the cell's inflamed. So the basic rule is first to identify, is there inflammation going on, and then why is it there? And stop throwing gasoline on the fire. That's where the wheat comes in, or other toxins. So with brain, we want to look for antibodies to your brain. And once again, there's a normal level of antibodies. That's to be expected, just to keep having a healthy brain, make new brain cells. There's a normal reference range. But when you have elevated antibodies to different parts of your brain, you've got a problem. There's some mechanism going on which may not be causing symptoms yet, or the symptoms are not being associated with the elevated antibodies, like depression, or anxiety, or brain fog, or migraines, or seizures. I mean, it doesn't matter what function you talk about in the brain. If it's inflamed, that may be the trigger causing that dysfunction. So we want to look for, are there elevated antibodies to brain tissue? And there are a few labs that will look at that for you now. And they will look to see, do you have elevated antibodies to myelin? Do you have elevated antibodies to cerebellum? Do you have elevated antibodies to gangliosides, which is a component of all nerves? So the value of looking is that you see, wow, I've got inflammation going on in my brain. I feel fine, but if it's elevated...
You may not know you don't feel fine.
That's right.
Often people don't know how badly they feel until they start feeling better.
Right, because they go on a diet or something, they say, well, I feel so much better, I'm thinking clear. They didn't realize they weren't thinking so clear before.
Well, one of the things we've been learning over the last few decades, in addition to the brain science of how we can increase our brain connections and build new brain cells is that inflammation is a common denominator across a whole spectrum of diseases, pretty much all chronic disease, whether it's heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, of course, autoimmune and inflammatory diseases, but also brain disorders. We know that dementia is inflammation of the brain. We know that autism is inflammation of the brain. We know that depression is inflammation of the brain. In fact, they're recommending anti-inflammatory drugs to treat depression. That's the wrong idea, but it shows you where the science is going. So what causes inflammation? Well, guess what? It's the usual culprits. It's our diet. We have a very inflammatory diet, high in sugar and processed foods, low in the good fats that are anti-inflammatory like omega-3 fats. It's low in phytochemicals, which are plant compounds that are anti-inflammatory in our food like vegetables and fruits and spices like turmeric. And all of these really promote inflammation in the body. Sugar is probably the worst. And then of course, there's other insults. We have things like Lyme disease and tick infections, viruses, and we have gut dysfunction. Gut dysfunction is probably the other major driver of inflammation because when your gut's inflamed, like most of our guts are, it creates inflammation not just in your gut, but throughout your body and in your brain. Toxins also play a role in driving inflammation. Stress plays a role in driving inflammation. Lack of exercise is inflammatory, and exercise is anti-inflammatory. So all these insults and all these factors are driving inflammation in the brain that leads to autism and Alzheimer's and depression and mood disorders and more. Are bugs in your gut affecting your brain or your immune system? Work with a functional medicine practitioner to determine and eliminate gut issues, including a leaky gut, irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and other gut issues.
In the last 10 or 20 years, the gut-brain axis has been a really hot topic in the research literature, and even now in the popular media. I think a lot of people have heard that there's a connection between the microbes that inhabit our gut and our brain, that things like intestinal permeability or leaky gut, when the gut barrier breaks down, that can cause problems with our brain, and it may be connected to conditions like autism spectrum disorder, ADHD. And then as you mentioned, the most current theory on what causes depression is known as the inflammatory cytokine model of depression. So that's a fancy way of saying that when our gut becomes inflamed, it produces chemicals that travel through the bloodstream, cross our blood-brain barrier, and suppress the activity in the frontal cortex. And that produces all of the telltale signs and symptoms of depression. So
should we be taking Advil for depression?
Absolutely not, because that's actually going to make the gut worse over the long term. We know that Advil can cause ulcers and a whole bunch of other problems in the gut. But what we should be doing is attending to our diet. You know, diet is a crucial factor for gut health. If we eat a lot of heavily processed and refined foods, that causes a pro-inflammatory microbiota, which means it feeds, pathogenic bacteria and bad bugs, allows them to proliferate, and then they produce compounds that can be toxic to the brain.
Do you have hormonal imbalances? Out of balance hormones like insulin and cortisol can detrimentally impact depression. A real, whole, unprocessed foods diet combined with lifestyle factors like stress control can help balance your hormones.
Things like parabens, BPA, they mimic estrogen in the body and disrupt our own natural hormonal rhythm. High stress is huge and contributes to hormonal imbalances, so there's a lot of variables. The symptoms that can manifest from hormonal imbalances for the brain: fatigue, depression, anxiety, brain fog, not feeling like yourself anymore. It's like you're looking through the world with the different lenses. So, and all of those really matter. When it comes to hormones and depression, you really need to look at all of them. And sometimes they're not easily measurable in the blood depending on how old a woman is or where they are in their menstrual cycle. So you have to look at all the symptoms. So estrogen, for example, is really a powerful hormone for depression. Estrogen really helps awaken the serotonin receptors in the brain. So when we're not exposed to healthy levels of estrogen, then those receptors aren't being activated and we're not getting the benefits of serotonin, which is considered to be our happy hormone. Feeling good and being able to sleep and less anxiety. Progesterone is another one. So progesterone is a hormone, we're only exposed to it from the time of ovulation to when we bleed to our periods. And that level can fluctuate a lot in women. Certainly in perimenopause, when we're not ovulating regularly, we're not being exposed to progesterone. And other times when women's estrogen-progesterone ratio isn't optimal, we can experience the effects of not having optimal progesterone levels. And progesterone helps activate GABA receptors in the brain, which is our calming and makes us feel relaxed. So if we're not having adequate progesterone, then the GABA, that important neurotransmitter, isn't being efficiently used. Progesterone also affects dopamine levels, and low progesterone would contribute to low dopamine, which is really important for the prefrontal cortex, which is our higher executive functioning and our mood and behavior. So there's a lot of different hormones that affect mood and depression. During perimenopause, one of the hallmarks are hormones just going up and down and not just being their normal rhythmic nature. And a woman's mood is absolutely feeling those effects.
I remember being in medical school, and one of the most ridiculous things I heard, and I was just a student, was that, yes, women have 50% of women will have a depressive episode at some time in their lives, and maybe only a third of men, but depression has nothing to do with hormones. And I just wanted to laugh and just say, have you ever met anyone in menopause? Have you ever had a female family friend, and monthly there's these mood swings? Now that's not a depressive episode, but there are a lot of things that play a role in our level of mood on a day-to-day basis. Are we getting enough sleep? Are our hormones balanced? What is our stress like?
Another major cause of depression and anxiety is stress. Constantly feeling stressed out is a surefire way to become depressed or stoke the fires of depression. Did you know that your phone and computer addiction can also contribute to depression and anxiety? More and more studies have been coming out showing the link between too much internet usage and screen time and mental and mood disorders like ADHD, anxiety, depression, and more. In a recent study, people who reported excessive internet use also reported social anxiety disorders, loneliness, social isolation, and lower quality of life. They also showed that internet addiction was associated with reduced immune function. Here's what our experts had to say about the link between social media and depression.
What's happened in the modern world is that these stressors, the sound of a screeching car tire, the sound of a helicopter, a text message that might be bringing something stressful, these are all starting to elicit calls to this emergency system that's not supposed to be used to the extent that it's being used, and that we are so far over in the overuse and abuse of this sympathetic nervous system that what's happening is we're starting to become more and more wired for stress. It's starting to break our brains. It's starting to collapse our adrenal function, which means store more fat, have much worse temper, and not be able to be present. Because when you're here, when you're now, when you're present is that parasympathetic feeling. And so most of us have this low-grade anxiety because the stress is overwhelming and it's usually just bubbling up. And that has a lot to do with the modern world, if you will, but also our interpretation of events, our ability to have better boundaries and allow for certain things to come into our life. And a lot of it I've found is also just calendar management, time management, being able to say no to things when you already have too much on your plate. And I think a lot of us have become people pleasers and oftentimes take on more than we should and our bodies can account for, so then we're in time compression, and that puts us into sympathetic overdrive again. It becomes a very vicious cycle. So the gentleman who coined the term stress, Hans Selye, back in the 50s, talked about distress, which is the negative type, and then eustress, which is the positive type. Stress has only a negative connotation, really, within our culture. But we know this in peak performance. We know this in all the modern sciences coming out, shows that positive stressors that don't break you down and keep you on that razor's edge make you better. So there's lots of good reason to have stress. I mean, look, if it weren't for stress, we wouldn't get out of bed. I mean, you get stressed when you don't have food and you got to go get it, right? So life brings on stress, but then the ability to match that stress with what you need to do to deliver and render and actually show up and learn and grow from that event. Oftentimes, again, if it's a razor's edge, sometimes you fall over and it becomes detrimental, and sometimes it helps you grow. So I think the modern human needs to learn to find that line of stress and stay right under where it's overwhelming so that it becomes a growth tool in life. And then you use stress to continue to grow, and then you understand how stress works so that then when you unplug, I call it drinking from infinity. You stop time. So you go hard, you work hard, and then you unplug and you relax fully and deeply so that then when you come back up, you have the reserves and you have the resilience to grow again through stress as again, it's a tool.
There's been a lot of research on what stress does to the brain. Now, small amounts of stress that are managed successfully tend to grow coping resources embedded in our own nervous system. That's good. That's pain with gain. But most pain has no gain. Most stressful experiences, in part because of the brain's evolved negativity bias, which means that it tends to overlearn from stressful, emotionally negative, emotionally painful experiences, and it tends to underlearn from beneficial, usually enjoyable experiences. So to really focus here, in terms of the effects of stress on the brain that are outside of mild experiences of stress that actually make us stronger, when stress is harming the brain, it does so through multiple pathways. One of the primary pathways involves the stress hormone cortisol. So the same neurohormonal machinery that evolved to help our ancestors run away from saber-toothed tigers and threats prior to that, that machinery is active today when we're stuck in traffic or having an irritating interaction with our partner or our kid, or our boss is coming at us too fast and too hard. We are experiencing releases of cortisol then, just as our ancestors did, running for their lives. And then up in the brain, cortisol has kind of a 1-2 punch. First, it overstimulates and sensitizes the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala. Technically, there are 2 amygdalae, one on either side of the brain. People speak of them in the singular. So now we have an alarm bell that reacts more easily and more loudly. Cortisol also overstimulates and gradually kills neurons in a nearby part of the brain, the hippocampus, which does 3 important things in terms of managing upsetting experiences. The hippocampus puts things in context. My boss is not my mother. She looks like my mother, she's authoritative like my mother, she's not my mother. Puts things in context. This is now. Second thing the hippocampus does is it literally inhibits, it puts the brakes on the alarm bell of the brain, the amygdala. It calms down the amygdala so it's not so intensely sounding the alarm. And then third, the hippocampus tells the hypothalamus, a very important part of the brain that is at the center of the stress hormone cascade. The hippocampus tells the hypothalamus, enough stress hormones already, no more. Well, that creates a vicious cycle. Stress today overstimulates the amygdala, weakens and damages the hippocampus. That makes us even a little more irritable, anxious, prickly, or blue tomorrow, a little more vulnerable to stress tomorrow, which then releases more cortisol, sensitizing the amygdala, damaging the hippocampus, which in turn makes us even more vulnerable to stress the day after that.
Doctors are calling stress the black plague of our century, and I don't think that that's an over-exaggeration. So if we want to understand why the human body reacts to stress in the way that it does, we have to cut back in time a few thousand years. Say we're hunting and gathering in the woods, and let's say that a saber-toothed tiger jumps out at us with the intent to kill. First thing that's going to happen is that our digestion will flood with acid to shut down digestion because we need all hands on deck to fight or flee this tiger. That same acid will seep onto the skin so that we don't taste very good if we get bitten into by that tiger. Our bladder and bowels will evacuate so we can be light on our feet. That's what the nervous poos are before you have a big thing to do. Your immune system goes to the back burner because who cares if you're going to get cancer if you're about to be killed by a tiger? And your adrenaline levels increase and your cortisol levels increase. And those are actually acidic in nature, and that can actually accelerate the body's aging. And we all know this intuitively. If we're working too hard, not sleeping, we look in the mirror and we look 10 years older than we are, and we go on vacation, we're like, oh, I look amazing. And that's sort of real-time feedback of what stress is doing to the body. So that series of chemical reactions is very useful if your demands are predatory attacks. But if your demands are in-laws or kids or deadlines or text messages or emails, then this fight or flight stress reaction has become maladaptive, and it's now disallowing us from performing at the top of our game. And this is where meditation really comes into play. Meditation goes in and it gets rid of that adrenaline and cortisol, and it actually starts to flood the brain with dopamine and serotonin, which are bliss chemicals. Not only does meditation feel amazing and improve your performance, but it also can reverse your body age by somewhere between 8 to 15 years, which I think is nuts. And when I first heard about this, I thought, well, come on, it's not magic. It's not a fountain of youth. It's not a miracle, and it's not. But what it's doing is that meditation is actually lengthening your telomeres. And the way I like to think about telomeres is that they're like the little plastic thing at the end of your shoelace. And if that plastic thing unravels, then your shoelace unravels. Well, similarly, if your telomeres unravel, then that can impact your actual DNA. It can impact how quickly that unravels.
Meditation, we've known for thousands of years, is a wonderful tool for self-discovery and relaxation and all these wonderful things that have passed down from the Himalayas. And it's like, okay, great. It's old, it must be true. Now you look at the data that's coming through, and everyone's so excited about what it does to the brain and builds the resilience and all sorts of things that help us with neuroplasticity. I didn't need that data back when I was, a monk in the 90s, because when you see a seasoned meditator, you see it immediately in their face. They're glowing. There's this feedback loop that's already there, because you could just notice that this is a calm, beautiful person. So when you're meditating, you start to build this part of the brain, and that's the part that says, no, you know what, I don't think you want to have that cheesecake. I know it sounds like a good idea right now, but no cheesecake. That's not on your diet. And it's that moment where that voice can come in and stop us from making terrible decisions, whether it's in our marital life or our business life or just our everyday diet. That comes from empowering the part of the brain that runs that show. And meditation clearly shows that that's what it can enhance. That's one of the many things it can enhance. But I mean, if all I had was negation of impulses, meditation would be the best drug in town, and it does way more than just that.
When you fix your body, you fix your broken brain. Your energy, your memory, your focus, and your joy will all increase. Depression will fade away like a bad dream. Here are some important steps for managing depression and anxiety today. First, eat whole, real food. Feed your brain and body with a nutrient-dense, whole, fresh, plant-based diet that includes plenty of protein and healthy fats. Your brain is mostly made up of fat, so it makes sense eating plenty of healthy fats and including anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids as a supplement, and adding good quality protein can help heal your brain.
I think the most exciting statistic that's come out about mental health actually was from a trial that came out in January 31st, 2017, which is the first ever randomized controlled clinical trial using diet to treat depression, like a real randomized trial. And that's what we've been missing in some ways in the data. There's been a lot of correlation. A modified Mediterranean diet was found to get 31% of patients into full remission. And these are patients who had pretty severe depression and were already on meds and in psychotherapy. So that's a statistic I like, people getting better using food. When we meet eaters in our nutritional psychiatry here in New York City, we do our eater evaluation and we see eaters kind of fall into a few categories. Like there's the beige diet, or we call it the 12-year-old boy diet, where it's like people are like, I eat pasta, pizza, chicken fingers, and martinis. That's my diet. It's like the 12-year-old diet plus alcohol. That's like some New Yorkers. And we look at that, and what we've really worked to do is create a method where we help people find joy in their food. That's really our goal, and to do that through enjoying real whole foods, enjoying them in a simple way, and focusing not on singular foods like kale or wild salmon or blueberries, but to focus on food categories. And food categories help people really think more broadly and more creatively about their diet. Right? If you're only eating kale, well, what about that great Swiss chard or those amazing sunflower sprouts or some purslane? Those are all wonderful leafy greens, and they all have great health benefits. That's really the hope, is that the MAD diet will be undone by this new movement we're seeing, where by last count there were 8,144 farmers markets in America. And I don't think there's better medicine for our country.
Next, cut out sugar. If you've ever eaten something sugary and crashed a little later, and felt absolutely miserable, you know how sugar can contribute to depression. Increasingly, research shows that sugar consumption can contribute to depression. Become a detective and find and avoid hidden sources of sugar which are more prevalent than you think.
We're addicted to sugar for a number of reasons. One, it's in everything. A second reason that I think is overlooked is we've shifted our palate. So I haven't eaten sort of simple sugars. I haven't had them in my house for a long time. And when I get something, boy, it's so sweet. Like a candy bar is out of control. It's super saturated, right? We kind of lived in this milieu of very salty, very sugary, very kind of powerfully flavored foods. And so people's palates have shifted towards craving and desiring that. So there's a way that as we talk about sugar being toxic, part of me feels like people have gotten quite confused. Sugar is a nutrient that our brain is quite dependent on and uses every day, and maintaining healthy blood sugar is absolutely critical, and cutting out simple sugars from your diet is one of the most important steps, I think, for people to take to reclaim their eating. At the same time, when you eat a plant-based diet, you're eating a lot of sugars, but they're a slower burning, lower glycemic index sugar, and they come again with all these nutrients. What's really, I think, hurting us are the sugars, the empty calories that don't come with any nutrients. It's like having lots of gas and no way to deal with the exhaust.
Next, exercise regularly and intensely. Again, studies show exercise is as good as, and even better than antidepressants in treating depression. I think less than 8% of Americans get the recommended daily exercise every day. And why is it important? Not only because it prevents heart disease, not only because it helps with weight, but because it has profound effects on the brain. We know that vigorous exercise 3 times a week is a better treatment for depression than most antidepressant drugs. We know that if you just take a walk every day, you dramatically reduce your risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. We know it's important for kids with ADD. We call that nature deficit disorder, where they're not out playing and enjoying their bodies and stimulating their nervous system in a positive way. They're overstimulated through video games and addictive behaviors. So these are really profound effects of exercise and across the board. And in fact, one of the most powerful things it does is increase BDNF. That's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's like Miracle-Gro for your brain. And what that does is it increases new brain cells, it increases the connection between brain cells. So you can remake your brain at any age. And exercise is one of the most powerful tools to do that.
Exercise for our brains lights it up. And as we talked about exercise sounding like movement, really lighting up the brain. We can be in a state of stuck. And we can go from that state of stuck to feeling lit up just by movement, just by exercising. A simple 10-minute walk can start to fire those neurons and start to wake everything up and really turn the lights on. As far as issues with clients that I've seen where they live a sedentary lifestyle and they're having a hard time feeling feeling energized, right? Typically are on a lot of depression meds, are typically more pessimists than optimists, and typically more negative in general.
I practice something called muscle-centric medicine, and really the focus of everything is the organ system of muscle. Muscle, you keep your muscle healthy, then you have your brain that's healthy. The other important aspect of exercise and the brain is that muscle as an endocrine organ, when you use resistance training, it actually secretes things. It secretes things like growth factor. It secretes things like BDNF. All these things help rejuvenate the brain, and they actually cross the blood-brain barrier. So you're not just training your muscles, but you're also regenerating your brain. So the patients that come to me when it comes to a sedentary lifestyle, by the time they get to me, they're really ready to change. And of course, as in the military, there's a crawl, walk, run. So we crawl. We just begin. We talk about just movement. We talk about the difference between exercise and physical activity. A lot of people do physical activity, which is just movement-based, and not a lot of people do exercise. And exercise are really planned, executed programs with progressions, and typically you train with somebody. Exercises that are good for the brain target large muscle groups. There's been a lot of study on cardiovascular health in the brain, and I think that one of the reasons that is because it's really easy to measure. That was kind of the big thing, was endurance training in the brain and BDNF. However, emerging data is really looking at resistance training, and resistance training is lifting weights. And lifting weights actually stimulates the muscle and creates things and situations that are healthy for the brain, like those growth factors that we talked about. Also helps with mood and cognition. Some examples of great exercises are really heavy compound movements. And to be very specific, you're thinking about the squat, the deadlift, the bench press.
Also, get enough sleep. Terrible sleep will only contribute to and exacerbate depression. So you want to aim for 8 hours of solid, uninterrupted sleep every night.
It doesn't take a neurologist to tell you that lack of sleep makes you crazy. Sleep is incredibly important for the remapping of neurons, of consolidation, trimming of thoughts and emotions and processes that happened all day. It's like you eat a meal, you got to digest it. You have an experience, your mind has to digest it. When we go down, it's when we shut down the amusement park to clean things up, to test everything out, to pressure test the rides and make sure tomorrow is going to be another good day. If we don't get that, we start to have issues kind of carrying forth in the next day. And so look at the kind of behavioral fallout, right? I didn't get enough sleep last night because my baby was up. And so this morning I had to have that third cup of coffee because Lord knows I got to show up and still be who I need to be at work type of thing. And then by 10 o'clock, my blood sugar's crashed, and so I'm snacking on things I would otherwise not be snacking on, going back for some more coffee, and now I've thrown off my blood sugar, I've thrown off my adrenals, and I'm at this place where I'm wired and tired, and by the end of the night, I'm not really as friendly as I should be to my children, right? And so you see this incredible fallout that carries forward into life that comes from a poor night's sleep, that then becomes behavioral, becomes marital problems, all these sorts of things that we see. It all starts from starting to slow down.
So there's something else that you sort of talked about, which is sort of related to this, which is this concept of circadian rhythm, and how that plays a role in our brain and our hormones and our neurotransmitters, which is basically how we live in rhythm or out of rhythm. So can you talk about that in the brain?
Yeah, this is really fascinating because it goes way back, way before humans, actually all the way back to the first single-celled organism that evolved on this planet. So we're talking about billions of years here. Every organism that ever came to be on this planet evolved in the 24-hour light and dark cycle that we have on planet Earth. So every cell of every organism is entrained to that 24/7, light-dark cycle. And we now know that in humans, that light-dark cycle affects every aspect of our physiology, from our endocrine system and our hormones, to our brain function, to our metabolism, everything. Sleep, of course, sleep. Most importantly, sleep. So what happens, essentially our bodies are hardwired to expect a period of light and that followed by a period of darkness. And when we wake up in the morning, our bodies start producing cortisol, which is a kind of like get up and go hormone. And then when night falls, it starts producing melatonin, which helps us to fall asleep and stay asleep. So the problem is now, in the last 150 years, we've developed artificial light, which is awesome. It allows us to be more productive, and entertainment and art and all kinds of things are possible with artificial light that weren't before. But the downside of that is now we can sit in our bed at 11 o'clock staring at our iPad, which is emitting blue light, the same spectrum of light that the sun emits, and that basically tells your body, oh, it's time to wake up, time to get the cortisol production going, and then the melatonin drops, totally messes with your circadian rhythm. And then that can have downstream effects like increasing the risk of obesity and metabolic disease, increasing the risk of depression and anxiety, seasonal affective disorder. We know even that flight personnel and people who do shift work are at much higher risk for cancer. And heart disease. So this just affects our immune system, our cardiovascular system, everything. So getting closer to that natural rhythm of light and dark is really important. It doesn't mean we all have to live in a tent in the backyard, but we can take steps to...
Can we put a mattress in it?
You could do that if you want. I mean, actually, it would be really good for you, but we can do things like, for example, if we have to use a computer at night, there are now glasses that you can buy that filter out the blue light that comes from those screens, or even if you're watching TV. So if you came to my house at night, you'd see my wife and I wearing these funny glasses with kind of an orange tint that filters that light out. You can take steps to try not to use electronic media within an hour or an hour and a half of bedtime, because that has that effect that I just described. And then get some bright light exposure during the day. So if you work in an office or in an indoor environment, make sure to go outside for a walk at lunchtime, or in the morning, take a walk. Make sure, with no sunglasses, make sure you let that light hit your retina and stimulate that cortisol production.
It's basically like candle therapy. When the sun goes down, switch to candles, get off your screens.
Absolutely.
And if you can't, wear those funny glasses.
Yeah, turn the lights down, get some mood lighting, and and then it's pretty widely recognized now, which is why even computer operating systems now, like the latest update for Mac, has something called Night Shift. So a lot of people might not even know that this is on their computer, but when you turn Night Shift on, what happens is when the sun goes down, the type of light that's emitted from the screen changes. It becomes warmer, which is meant to mimic more of the kind of light that you would be exposed to at night, not during the daytime.
Next, learn how to control and manage your stress. Constantly feeling stressed out becomes a surefire way to become depressed or stoke the fires of depression. Find out what calms you and practice it regularly, whether that includes meditation or yoga or just walking your dog. Sometimes we need to find ways to deal with stress or anxiety in the moment. That's when deep breathing can be very helpful.
Meditation doesn't have to necessarily mean that you're sitting under a tree and escaping from the whole world. Sometimes just a few minutes in your office, in between clients, could be enough to help recharge your batteries. A lot of the techniques I like in meditation involve breath work and practicing presence and really watching the breath as it goes in and as it goes out. And that can be done quite simply by using a mantra, if you will, of as you inhale, saying the words I am silently in your own mind, and as you exhale, saying the word peace silently in your own mind. And doing that just for a few minutes, I am peace, I am peace. And saying that to yourself silently as you're inhaling and exhaling, just for a few moments, could bring you some peace inside. I've used techniques of meditation and hypnosis for my own self-healing, and I like to use a complementary approach when I'm working with people. I'm working with the hardware, right? So that's the brain, physiology, neurotransmitters, brain blood flow, optimization of the brain. But at the same time, we're also doing software work. We're working in psychotherapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is one technique I like very much. And also using other techniques, working with the unconscious mind, working with someone's timeline, doing work with hypnosis. Practicing presence is another beautiful method of really learning to be in the present moment. The mind always wants to take you out of the present moment. The mind wants to take you into the future or take you into the past. And both of those involve thought. So it's impossible to be in the present moment and have thought at the same time. To really be in the present moment will require the mind to turn off. That essentially is meditation. So think about this. The moment your mind goes into the future, the mind has to be turned on. When the mind goes into the past, ruminating, the mind has to be on. You have to be thinking. But to be in the present moment, and why it's so difficult, is it's really turning an off switch to the mind. The mind will fight you because it doesn't want to be turned off. It wants to stay in the future or in the past. It believes that it needs to do that. When you are the master of yourself, you can have an off switch to turn off the noise machine in the head so that you can get yourself to the present moment. You can be in a state of no mind, essentially. Even if it's for a few moments, it's like hitting a reset button and turning the switch off to give you some more restoration for yourself, so that when you do need to use the mind, it's purposeful and it's sharp.
If you go down to the level of the nervous system and what I've been talking about so far around being disconnected. So what that means at the level of the nervous system is that we've become very disembodied. And what that means, that term disembodied, is that we're not connecting with our emotions as part of our human experience. that we're, in the West especially, we're a culture defined by, I think, therefore I am. My thoughts, my conscious mind, that's me. So belief in our own thoughts, it serves us when it's connected to what's happening in the moment. So our nervous system has many components to it that read and sense the environment and guide us to how to respond. You know, like my stomach letting me know I'm hungry, pain lets me know that there's some force on my body that's causing trauma. Anxiety, its primary purpose is to let me know that there's something dangerous, there's something concerning in my environment. So our emotions are bodily experiences, they're sensations in our body that inform us. And then we have this capacity for thought, we have this capacity for reflection, to reflect and be able to choose, to be able to decide how to handle the situation. What's happened is, as we progress more and more in modern life, we're more and more disconnected from our sensations. We're more and more disconnected from reading the environment, and very common experience in modern man is feeling stuck in his head. So we can become disconnected, what we call disembodied.
I see adolescents 13 and up. With the use of social media, I've seen an increase in depression, anxiety, more towards our adolescent and the young adults, because the lifestyle changes that you're dealing with, the developmental stages that you're dealing with high school, which in general, high school, there's a lot of peer competition. There's been a lot more bullying. And with the use of Facebook, Instagram, social media, they're able to Snapchat a picture of someone that they're bullying, and it can just go viral. So with that, I've seen a lot of, especially in that age group, even college, it goes pretty viral with the use of social media, misuse of social media, and it can cause a lot more depression and anxiety.
There's a lot of research on this in terms of amount of use, and people who spend X number of hours a day on Facebook, that it does lead to lower self-esteem, it does correlate with depression. So I think that in terms of the research on whether there's a link, I think that that's not a question really at this point. I think that but at the same time, we're not going to get away from technology, and I think so. Balance is somehow really important.
I talk about superpowers a lot and superheroes, right? I think everybody has these innate mental superpowers of focus, of concentration, of creativity, and so on. But I think there are three supervillains that are attacking us on a regular basis that have never been here before. There's number one, there's digital overload. Right? They call it information fatigue syndrome, information anxiety. So what's the result? We have higher blood pressure, a compression of leisure time, more stress than ever, right? Or even if we have leisure time, we can't even enjoy it because our minds are still multitasking, thinking about all these other things. There's an epidemic of sleeplessness, right? Because of all this overload and overwhelm, there's so much information in the digital age, the amount of information is doubling at dizzying speeds. And how many people feel like they go out there and they buy books, right? And they buy all these books to help themselves, and it sits on the shelf, and it becomes shelf help instead of self-help, right? There's so much information, emails and social media and app notifications and text messages and newspapers and magazines and so on. It feels like you're taking a sip of water out of a fire hose. And if knowledge is power, then it's not only power, it's profit in today's day and age, right? The faster you can learn, the faster you can earn. But the amount of information is doubling at dizzying speed. The president of Google says that the amount of information from the dawn of humanity to the year 2003, just a little over a decade ago, that amount of information now is created every 2 days online. So people are drowning in information, but they're starving for practical wisdom, right? And so if the amount of information is doubling like this, the challenge is how we learn it, how we remember it, how we read it is pretty much consistent. That gap creates a lot of stress and anxiety. So number one villain is digital overload.
Top neuroscientists around the world have now codified that mobile phone addiction or mobile device addiction is real. These devices that we're using day to day are actually addictive. They give us a dopamine rush every time we look at them. Dopamine is the same chemical in the brain that's activated when you eat sugar or when you take cocaine. So we know that these phones that have now become literally attached to us are addictive, and that it's really hard for people to put them down. And when dopamine, that important neurochemical that you get this rush from, goes away, well, how do you feel? You feel dropped, you feel down, you feel anxious, the same way that you feel when you crash from having too much sugar, right? And so people, I think, are caught in this cycle of wanting that dopamine rush,
feeling that crash when it's not there, and then getting it again, and then that's creating anxiety. We know that mobile phones contribute to insomnia through affecting the way that our hippocampus controls our circadian rhythms. We know that the effects of these devices are real, and I believe that we're literally conducting the largest uncontrolled experiment on humankind that's ever been done with our use of mobile devices and screens. And we don't know how this is going to affect us long term because it's so early. It's 2017 right now. The iPhone came out in 2007. In 10 years, we have radically changed the way that we work, the way that we shop, the way that we communicate with everyone in our lives, the number of people with whom we're communicating on a regular basis. And that is radical, and that is a very fast and very quick period of time to change all of these fundamental ways in which we live our lives. These devices are awesome, but they're really affecting our health, and we have to change the way that we interact with them and make sure that they're serving us. Otherwise, we're going to be a slave to technology, and that's not why we created it. So I always recommend that people avoid social media at key points in their day where they're getting habituated to looking at it just reflexively, right? Typically that can be in the morning or at night. Make a choice, make a decision not to start your day with social media and not to end it with social media. It doesn't mean you can't check it all day, but I always recommend having some sort of routine in the morning that's screen-free. We know that most people are going to spend 8+ hours a day looking at a screen. Don't make that the first 30 minutes that you wake up. Get up, take a shower, get dressed, make your breakfast. In my case, walk the dogs or take care of the baby. Do something that doesn't involve your screen and resist that temptation to look at it and just sort of time box it, right? Set that limit and say, I'm not going to look at screens for this period of time. And then the same thing in the evening when you get home. People are going to bed too late. They're staying up for an extra 30 minutes, an hour even, looking at media before they go to bed. Keep your phone out of your bedroom. Again, remind yourself you have plenty of time to look at your phone all day, but create these special hiatus times at the bookends of your day where you can get used to not always having it. I think that's really important.
And finally, take the right nutrients. Many nutrients can alleviate depression and support optimal brain function. The most important is omega-3 fatty acids. You can also use 5-HTP, which is a precursor of serotonin, the feel-good chemical. Remember, stress lowers the feel-good neurotransmitter called serotonin. This leads to food cravings, depression, and other mood disorders. 5-HTP naturally replenishes serotonin levels in the brain. Also, vitamin B6 can help support healthy moods and help reduce food cravings. I suggest working with a functional medicine practitioner to customize a nutrient program that works for you. Over the years, I found many patients don't connect how they feel with how they eat, or how much they rest and sleep, or how much they exercise, or how much time they make for friends and community, as well as the media and news to which they expose themselves, which all can be stressful. Once you make these connections, you can change your approach to these important factors and to the other dozens of daily decisions you make every day. Feeling fully energized and maintaining great brain health ultimately requires taking out the bad stuff and putting in the good stuff, including food choices and lifestyle choices. Many of us get too little good food, too few nutrients, not enough good light and air, water, rest, sleep, rhythm, exercise, both mental and physical, and too little community and love and meaning and purpose. Getting all of these ingredients for health is absolutely important for an optimally functioning brain. Many of the experts we interviewed for this docuseries are using cutting-edge technology and alternative therapies for treating depression and other brain disorders. One of these therapies is called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. We talked to a few practitioners about TMS, how it works, how it helps, and here's what they had to say.
I do an interventional technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation. And I remember one patient in particular who was on psychotropics, several psych meds. And I used this technique and was able to not only get them into remission, but after they wanted to get off of their medications, we used exercise and diet and different lifestyle modifications and brain training. And through these techniques, they actually achieved remission, which means an absence of symptoms. And they remained that way for the entirety of the time that I followed them.
So TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation, is an MRI strength magnet. It's 1.5 Tesla. So it's equivalent to a magnet that's used in an MRI machine for helping with imaging for individuals. That strength of magnet is used and pulsed on and off over a 20 to 40 minute period of time. It creates a magnetic field. That magnetic field then creates electrical current. So as the magnetic field comes down, about 3 centimeters of depth within the brain, it then perpendicularly creates electrical current. As you create electrical current, nerves fire. They release chemicals or neurotransmitters like serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Those are the neurotransmitters that we provide artificially through medications, and now we're able to facilitate their release utilizing the TMS. We're able to target where the magnet is treating, and that's in the treatment of depression, what's called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It's basically the left front portion of the head. It's the area of the brain that's underactive as a result of the depression. So as the magnet pulses on and off, we're not only stimulating the release of those neurotransmitters, serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, but we're also then facilitating the currents, the circuits to then fire that's involved in mood regulation. So we know that within depression, not only do we have a dysfunction in these neurotransmitters, but we also have a malfunction in these circuits. So we're also able to come back and help facilitate the connectivity of the brain to help treat the illness of depression. And we're able to do it in a manner that doesn't have the risks that come with medications. Oftentimes individuals come in, and part of the difficulty in effectively treating their illness is they can't tolerate medications. Common complaints will be they have sexual dysfunction, they have weight gain, they have tiredness, they have upset stomach, other gastrointestinal type symptoms. And with TMS, we're facilitating the release of those neurotransmitters within the brain so they're not going throughout the body and creating those physical symptoms and side effects that can occur from medications. So it's a treatment that's extremely well tolerated. The most common complaint individuals might have is a little transient discomfort from the pulsing of the magnet as it's placed against the head. And that pulsing, if you will, is quickly individuals desensitized to. They might have a little bit of transient headache, but it's nothing that an Advil or Tylenol can help alleviate. And so as they continue treatment, and again, treatment lasts about 20 to 40 minutes, we're able to make these changes in the brain. Now, keep in mind with the TMS, it's a treatment that is done multiple days. So it's done 5 days a week for approximately 6 weeks in duration. And over that course of time, as we're facilitating changes in the brain, we're also helping neurons to regenerate. So we know within the illness of depression, neurons can shrink or what we call atrophy, and we can help facilitate the neurogenesis, or regeneration of neurons, again, to help provide not only individuals' mood getting better, but the longevity of the illness being under remission. TMS has been FDA cleared for individuals who have failed an antidepressant treatment. The reality is more commonly individuals who come to my practice are individuals who have had not years but decades of depression. They've had multiple medication trials and sometimes they're on multiple medications and still struggling. But the science tells us that individuals, when we treat them, and we treat them sooner within the illness and to the point of remission, meaning the depression is gone, those are the individuals that we can more effectively treat. Now, that doesn't mean we can't help individuals who have had long years of depression, because that's who I am treating, and I'm having great success with it. I mean, I've even had individuals who have failed ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, or even have vagal nerve stimulation, VNS implanted within their chest, and still struggling with depression.
Whether it be diet or lifestyle changes, exercise or stress management techniques or alternative therapies, or a combination of all of these, there's almost always something you can do about depression and anxiety. Never lose hope.
The most important piece of advice I would want people to hear is my message of hope. That I've treated thousands of people with clinical depression, and I am shocked at how much people can transform, of being on my couch, ready to kill themselves with nothing to live for, tearful, not able to sleep, right about to head into the hospital. And some weeks later, months later, be there as a bright, vibrant, loving, a human being, all of what a human can offer. And I think people are frustrated because I don't perfectly know how to get from A to B. But I do know through engagement, through good clinical treatment, for good alliance, that you can get from A to B. So I think the first thing I would want people to hear is a message of hope, which I know when I've struggled with my mood, that's hard to believe.
When I want to tell somebody with anxiety or depression, feeling really hopeless, first of all, there is hope. There's always hope. And to really check out the biochemistry of what's going on. Yes, there's situational things. Yes, bad things happen that make you feel depressed and anxious. But very, very often, once you address the biochemistry, whether it's hormonal, vitamin deficiency, an adrenal burnout issue, thyroid issue, once you've addressed that and you're supporting the biochemistry, very often that anxiety and depression will clear up. And if there are remnants, if there are things to still deal with, because we're human beings and I think therapy is a good thing, then you can really have therapy and you can apply it. But when you're just painfully anxious or painfully depressed, it's really hard to absorb the information in therapy or really to apply it because you're just so basically out of it. You know, you're not working on all cylinders. And the worst thing to do, I mean, people, the advice is always, well, go see your physician. I don't know. Unless it's a holistic physician, functional medicine physician, it's a little tricky because you're going to be prescribed a medication, be told you need to be on it probably for a very long time, and then once you're on it, it's really hard to get off, and you're in this vicious cycle.
In the world of functional medicine, we take a different approach to depression and anxiety by trying to understand what creates it. To call someone depressed or anxious says nothing about the underlying causes that create depression or anxiety. While simple, this approach requires digging deep and connecting patterns. You might still need therapy or medication, but it's best not to assume that these methods will cure the problems without first addressing the underlying causes. Using the advice outlined by our experts can create major shifts in your body and your brain. In the next episode, we talk to our experts about traumatic brain injury, which unfortunately is rarely treated properly. You'll learn how things like diet and supplementation can actually help create dramatic recoveries after traumatic brain injury. I'll see you there. Doesn't it feel good to know that there's almost always something you can do to reclaim your health? I'm so grateful to all of my colleagues who volunteered their time to sharing their life's work with you. It is our life's mission to spread the message about what it takes to get health and stay healthy. The Broken Brain docuseries gives us a chance to do that. And spreading the message about brain health is so important right now, especially with all the misinformation and outdated medicine being practiced. We want to set the record straight and provide you with important steps to take right now so that anyone who is looking to heal can find the answers. If you're finding this series to be helpful, help us spread the message and continue our mission by sharing this docuseries with your friends and loved ones. You can do this by clicking the link below.